All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Andy. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a member of the East Bay chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America and the Anti-Imperialism Working Group. We are very excited to have with us today Rob McKenzie, joining to talk about his new book, El Golpe, U.S. Labor, the CIA, and the Coup at Ford in Mexico. Before we actually get started, if you haven't signed in yet, greatly appreciate it if you could. I'll go ahead and post a link in the chat so you can do so. Here we go. All right, yeah, if you could go ahead and log in through there, that would be great. That just lets us know that you showed up, and it'll allow us to do a follow-up email on this on some more resources related to this event and some of our organizers. We also had Liberation Road and Mexico Solidarity project. They were kind enough to give us their flyer on an event that they did, a similar talk that they did with Rob a bit back. Be sure to check out the flyer and check out the QR code in the back if you haven't checked in with if you want to get access to their regular bulletin. I'll see if I can get a link to that too in the Zoom or in a follow-up email later. But yeah, so Rob McKenzie was a long-time union representative, worker, and member of. Hold on 1 second. Can you close that to me? I don't know. Can you hear that?
I heard a little something.
Oh, okay, there's like a wild cop chase happening.
Uh-oh.
All right, cool. So, welcome to Oakland. Rob McKenzie was a longtime union representative, worker, and member of the Minnesota State AFL-CIO Executive Board prior to writing this book. He has worked as an assembler, industrial electrician, and full-time union representative for 28 years at the Ford Assembly Plant in St. Paul, Minnesota. He has also served as the president of the UAW 879 at the Ford plant for 4 consecutive terms, regional servicing representative for the international UAW, and he was elected to and served on the Minnesota State AFL-CIO Executive Board for 12 years as a multi-union representative. Rob was also elected as a secretary-treasurer for UAW Ford Subcouncil number 2, a national bargaining council of U.S. Ford assembly plants between 2002 and 2006. Following his retirement in 2016, Rob began his research and investigation into the attack on Ford workers at the Cautilán plant near Mexico City. Now, we are also fortunate enough to have with us today the president of Rob's local General Motors UAW chapter, Steve Frisk. After Rob gives his presentation, I'll have Rob answer a few questions I prepared. And one of these questions will connect content from this text with the recent UAW strikes. At that point, we'll have Steve tell us a bit about recent developments with the strikes, and then we'll open up a conversation between him and Rob and questions from the audience and any related commentary. Hey, Mike, welcome. Hey. So, as you will hear during Rob's presentation in just a minute, this book investigates the coup, or El Golpe, at the Ford Cautilán factory in Mexico, wherein a group of gangsters shot dissident workers, leaving many wounded and 1 dead. In tracking those responsible for the violent suppression, Rob confirms not only CIA involvement, but that of an American labor organization, the AFL-CIO, the AIFLD, American Institute of Free Labor Development, which was a branch of the AFL-CIO as well. While this book spends a great deal of time focusing on the events surrounding El Golpe, it also elucidates a larger network of CIA infiltration into labor movements abroad, all through the cover of local American labor. Rob's investigation of AFLD details how pockets of American labor leadership, particularly within AFL-CIO and UAW, conspired with CIA spooks and Cold Warriors to interfere with foreign politics and labor in the interests of Cold War foreign policy and American capital. Through AFLD, the CIA, in connection with American labor, those pockets I mentioned, was able to infiltrate labor unions overseas and weaponize them for their own purposes. We believe that this text offers essential insight into the interconnection between local labor issues at home and American imperialism abroad, the history of CIA infiltration into American labor, the wake left behind by that infiltration, and the continued necessity for upholding an international lens in both our labor work and socialist project. So we'll go ahead and have Rob do his presentation now. If anyone in the audience has any questions, please hold on to those for the time being. After Rob does his presentation and then I go over a few prepared questions, we're going to open up questions to the audience. And when that happens, I'll have you follow the stack system. I'll explain that when we get there. But yeah, Rob, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, we're ready to start the PowerPoint. It should take about 20 minutes.
Sounds good. One sec. Let me go ahead and get that started. Video.
You don't have to look at me during this.
Yeah, one sec. I'll have it so it's
all right.
All on here. Hold on. All right, I think we're good.
All right. So turn to the next slide.
One sec. There we go.
There we go. In 1990, I was working at a Ford assembly plant in St. Paul, Minnesota. Our local union heard about an attack that took place in a Ford assembly plant in Cautilán, Mexico, in which several workers were wounded and one died. Next one. Our local union, along with some in the US and other parts of the world, did support work for the Mexican workers' dissident group involved with this, the Ford Workers' Democratic Movement. Next one.
Sorry, one sec. There we go.
In 1996, I was attending a meeting of the Coalition for Justice in the Maquiladoras in Texas. And at the conclusion of that meeting, a staff person for the newly elected president of the AFL-CIO approached me and in our conversation told me that the American Institute for Free Labor Development had been involved at Cautilán and that it was linked to the CIA. I was not able to learn anything more at that time, but when I retired, I began researching this, and after 5 years, I believe I learned what had happened. Next. During the 1980s, Mexico was in an economic depression caused by the worldwide economic crisis and its dependence on oil revenues. Inflation reached triple digits, social spending was cut back, and the ruling political party, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, the PRI, began instituting free market pro-business policies. In 1985, Mexico City was hit by a major earthquake, and this would lead to a political crisis. Next. In 1988, Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, the son of a popular Mexican president in the 1930s, broke from the PRI and campaigned against the PRI's policies and its 65-year history of one-party rule. His political coalition included communists and socialists. In an election that is generally considered today to have been massively fraudulent, the government declared the PRI the candidate, Carlos Salinas the victor. The opposition parties did not accept the result. The military seized the ballot boxes, and a few years later, those were burned along with the ballots in them. Next. In the wake of the upheaval, the Bush administration sent a diplomatic and intelligence team to Mexico that had worked together in Honduras in support of the Contras. Next. Robert Pastorino wrote the first conceptual draft of NAFTA while in Mexico, and Negroponte considered facilitating negotiations over NAFTA that has been his greatest achievement in the Mexico assignment. Well, Mexico, let's go back to the car. Yep. While Mexico was in an economic political turmoil in the 1980s, auto companies began to make big investments in export-oriented production facilities. By the mid-1980s, Ford Motor had built 2 new plants in northern Mexico. Ford Cautilán Plant, located just outside of Mexico City, had been built in 1962 and was producing for the domestic market. Ford was working to align that plant's labor contract with new lower level wages and benefits it established at its new northern plants. Cautilán Plant was represented by the Confederation of Mexican Workers. The CTM was an integral part of the PRI and had a reputation for corruption and subservience to the employers. In 1987, a new labor agreement needed to be negotiated at the Ford Cautilán Plant. Sales were down and Mexico was experiencing very high inflation. The CTM leadership and Ford agreed on a plan. Ford would not match the 27% wage increase recommended by the government, and the CTM would call a strike. Ford would pay half the wages of the workers while they were on strike, and it would in effect be a layoff. There was a problem with this for the workers, though. Under Mexican law, an employer could terminate a labor contract after a 3-month strike, which Ford did, firing all 3,500 workers. A new contract was eventually ratified, resulting in a 40% wage and benefit reduction and the permanent dismissal of 600 people. Okay, now we can go to the next. Both the strike and the contract ratification had opposition in the plant. Several left-wing political groups were organizing at the Ford Cautilán Plant in the early 1980s. The most successful of these was the Revolutionary Workers' Party. Following the 1987 contract, members or supporters of this group were in firm control of the local. They took aggressive steps to build the Cautilán local into a militant democratic union and gained a reputation throughout Mexico. Next one. In July of 1989, the General Secretary of the Ford CTM, Hector Uriarte, would have to run for election. He was appointed in 1987, and the Ford Cautilán leadership planned to run a candidate against him. Because of the size of their local, they thought they would win easily. A few weeks before the election, Ford fired 4 of the 6 local executive committee members, and Uriarte was easily reelected. The struggle now began in earnest. Okay, next one. The fired executive committee members continued to act as the leadership of the locals. In December, a major problem developed over pay. In the spring, Ford had made a large profit-sharing payment to the workers. In an effort to benefit Uriarte, they made this payment. They didn't withhold taxes, so it seemed like even more. In December, the taxes were withheld, resulting in tiny or non-existent paychecks. The tax scheme had never been communicated to the workers, who now suspected Uriarte of embezzlement and staged a walkout from the plant. They blocked a highway in front of the building, contacted the media to air their grievances, and elected a commission to negotiate with the company. When the CTM agreed to meet with the workers on January 8th, the workers agreed to return to work on January 3rd. Next one. On January 5th, local leaders came to the plant to hand out leaflets calling on workers to attend the January 8th meeting with the CTM. A group of about 30 thugs kidnapped 6 of the leaders at gunpoint. When workers in the plant learned of this, they began a sit-down strike. By 6 p.m., the leaders had been released, and the workers in the plant went home for the weekend. Next one. On Sunday evening, January 7th, the local leaders got word that strange things were going on in the plant. Unknown people were entering the facility and were being given Ford uniforms. Outside the building, several hundred thugs were gathering under the command of Wallace de la Mancha, a gangster. Before the shift began, they entered the Ford complex. When the workers arrived for the shift, the thugs began threatening and intimidating the workers who organized and confronted them. A fight broke out. 9 workers were wounded by gunfire before the invaders were driven out of the plant, and one of the 9 died from his wounds. Next one. Workers decided to occupy the plant and notified the press of their demands that included rehiring the fired executive committee members and holding a National Democratic Congress on union rights in Mexico. After 2 weeks, 2,000 police evicted the strikers from the plant. Next one. By February 8th, only about 1,000 of the 3,800 workers had returned to work. The strike would continue until the government allowed Ford to terminate the contract and fire everyone who didn't return to work. By February 15th, this is 1990, 2,500 had returned to work, but they were wearing black armbands in support of the workers that had been terminated. Unable to get production running, Ford reached an agreement with the local. They fired 600, but those eventually were awarded a 3-month settlement pay. Next one. Circumstantial evidence points to Wallace de la Mancha as a CIA contract agent who organized the intervention into the plant that erupted into violence. Mancha soon died under suspicious circumstances. Documents show the American Institute of Free Labor Development was directly involved in the events at Ford Cautilán in the 1980s. Next one. If everyone's had time to read that there. Bill Doherty spent his whole career working for the government-funded labor organization, AFL, and he was its director for 30 years. He was also involved with the suppression of dissent over foreign policy and U.S. labor. Philip Agee listed Doherty as a CIA agent in his 1976 book, Inside the Company's CIA Diary, and we credited him working with Doherty on a CIA project in Ecuador. Next. So I'm pronouncing this Björne. I've heard some people pronounce it Björn, but I'm pronouncing it Björne. Joe Björne was given credit for the idea of AFL by top AFL-CIO officials. New research proves it was in fact a government creation. In 1966, Victor Reuther did an interview with the LA Times linking the AFL-CIO foreign policy, AFL, and the CIA. Björne made a motion at the next AFL-CIO Executive Council meeting to condemn Victor for this, and it passed. Why don't we move along? We could talk about this guy for more, but UAW left the AFL-CIO after that Executive Council fight, and they stopped paying dues and left. Walter founded a rival labor federation called the Alliance for Labor Action. In 1968, Walter and Victor were involved in a plane crash like the one that took Walter's life later. In that fatal 1970 crash, there were unexplained problems with the altimeter, and author Michael Parenti wrote that the FBI had 59 pages of documents on the incident they would not release. I've been working for 2.5 years on trying to get those documents, and I'm making some progress. The Reuthers had a 3-decade-long conflict with another AFL-CIO official linked to the CIA, Jay Lovestone. Next. Lovestone was forced out of the head of the US Communist Party by Stalin in 1930 and became intensely anti-communist. Lovestone's animosity with the Reuthers dates to the 1930s when Lovestone was involved in internal UAW politics. As director of the Free Trade Union Committee, he became one of the most powerful players in the Cold War. He formed a close personal relationship with CIA Chief of Counterintelligence, James Angleton. George Meany found a check from the CIA intended for Lovestone, and after he'd been warned not to get paid from the CIA, he was forced out by Meany in 1974 of the AFL-CIO. And when I was writing the manuscript, I wrote, Lovestone began reporting to Angleton in 1954. There's been a new book come out since El Golpe did by a British journalist named Tom Griffin, who wrote that Angleton recruited Lovestone as an agent in 1955. He was operated by an aide of Angleton's, a guy named Stephen Miller, who also had the Israel desk in the CIA, and he was paid through a New York attorney. I think his name was Odin. There is no question now that Lovestone, who was the International Affairs Director of the AFL-CIO between 63 and 74, was a paid CIA agent. The AFL-CIO has never commented on this. They've never disputed it. They've never acknowledged it in any way. And I think that's a real mistake. I think labor really needs to acknowledge these mistakes. And so things like this don't happen again. Okay, next one. During the Cold War, AFL-CIO foreign policy was in large part directed by government agents. They were also active in suppressing dissent over foreign policy and labor. The consequences of this can be observed by an examination of the labor struggle at Ford Cautilán in 1980s and early 1990s. This is what we have attempted to do in our book, El Golpe, U.S. Labor, the CIA, and the coup at Ford in Mexico. That is the end of the PowerPoint.
Thank you so much for that, Rob. Yeah, so I had a few questions I was gonna go over with you, and then after that, well, that will lead into talks about the recent UAW strikes, and then we can open up questions to the audience. But yeah, first, I thought I'd look a little bit more at AFL and U.S. labor history and the connection there. So this book touches on a lot of essential and not really discussed much pieces of labor history. Standing at the center of all of this is the American Institute of Free Labor Development, Now, I had not really heard of AFLD in the past, but it does seem that, along with its sister branches like the AALC and the AAFLI, given the function it served for the CIA infiltration abroad, it seems like these played pretty essential roles in both Cold War policies and imperialist and neocolonial interventions. So could you tell us a little more about AFLD in terms of both how it presented itself, or what its claimed purpose was, and what its actual function ended up being?
I just knew very little about AFLD. I vaguely thought it was connected to the CIA. But when I started the research, I assumed that there had been some academic who'd written a definitive book with the history of it, its relationship to the AFL-CIO, and its relationship to the CIA. That was totally wrong. There was nothing virtually. The first 4 chapters of the book are a history of AFL, and also the debate in the US labor movement about labor's involvement with AFL, which is also very interesting and revealing. Of course, there were people who were opposed to this. What I came to the conclusion, and I'm quite sure of this, that AFL was a government-funded organization. Government agencies paid 98% of its budget throughout its whole existence. It was managed by the CIA. There were only 2 executive directors in the 34-year history of AFL. One was a guy named Serafino Romaldi, and the second was this William Doherty Jr. There is no question that they were career CIA agents. And if somebody wants to dispute that with me, I would be thrilled to death to hear what they had to say. And now what was its relations to the AFL-CIO? That is complicated. They needed the AFL-CIO cover because they operated as a labor group. They operated like they were part of the AFL-CIO. And I thought they probably were for quite a while. I now think they were independent. But they were allowed to speak on behalf of the AFL-CIO. They had the full support of the AFL-CIO leadership on international affairs. And they were working with them to suppress dissent within labor over what AFL-CIO's foreign policy would be. So now the way they promoted themselves and defined themselves, they said that, well, we do, education about communism and the benefits of a capitalist, free market, democratic system like we have in the US. And they did do a lot of training. They had regional training centers throughout Latin America. They had a very big training center near Washington, D.C., where they brought people from Latin America. And so they did do that kind of training. But they also were very active against leftist unions. And it varied. Sometimes they're Christian Democrat unions they would undermine. Sometimes they were pro-communist unions. But, in British Guiana, which is the first chapter of the book, they played a major role in destabilizing the government there. They helped conduct the longest general strike in history to overthrow a socialist prime minister in British Guiana. In Chile, they were very active. We have a chapter in Chile that this graduate student who worked with me wrote much of that. He did original research on that. They were very involved in destabilizing the Allende government through promoting strikes and funding strikes in Chile. And Brazil, they helped the military take over in a coup in Brazil in 1964. They kept the phone lines open so the coup leaders could communicate. And AFL openly supported the military dictatorship in 1964 when they took power. And then El Salvador, they supported a far-right government in the labor movement in El Salvador. So, there's still people who say, well, they were an educational institution. They were, but they did a lot more than that. Is that enough for AFL?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think it really illustrates how, their tactics would really vary depending on the what was specifically happening in a country and like what seemed to be the most effective form of intervention. What would best support Cold War policies? I think I really found the chapter on Chile illuminating on like the connection specifically with labor, given how they would weaponize unions and have them start pitting their strikes against the Allende administration. So I think if I remember correctly, it was the truckers strike and copper mining,
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
yeah, and that really you know, that hurt the finances, Chile's finances at that time. But no, I appreciate you mentioning other examples as well, because it does seem that it really did vary depending on the country, on like how they would approach this. Yeah, I think that was a great explanation. I think if you wouldn't mind, would you maybe give us a brief overview of AFL-CIO history and how this kind of like connects to when AFL joined? And so I guess specifically I'm thinking of what are the origins of AFL and CIO? How did they later merge? What were their inner politics? I'm thinking specifically of the inner tensions around socialism, anti-communism, Cold War matters, and how did the CIA become enmeshed in the AFL-CIO later on?
You know, there's a lot of good books on this, but you know, the AFL was founded in the 1880s as a labor federation of craft unions. So originally millwrights, blacksmiths, carpenters, later on electricians, plumbers, machinists. People formed unions based around their skill. So one employer could have 5 or 6 different unions working for him, representing all the different skills. The AFL was very skeptical about organizing mass production workers, who really began to expand and grow into millions of people in the early part of the 20th century. There were people who wanted to organize those workers, and a lot of the organizing there was done by communists and socialists. They formed these people who wanted to organize, including the mine workers union, who wanted to organize unskilled workers, formed something called the Committee on Industrial Organization, that later became the Congress of Industrial Organizations. And after World War II in the early 50s, these two organizations wanted to merge to have more unified power for labor. The AFL would not merge unless the CIO forced out all of the communist leaders of the unions where they were working. Everybody had to sign anti-communist oaths. Unions that refused to go along with this were expelled from the CIO. One of those was the UE, United Electrical Workers, who was still very active today and still independent of the AFL-CIO. But in 1955, these two organizations had merged. And there was a lot of political fight against the left in those years. Now, really, I think I would date the CIA's involvement in labor to 1944. This is even before the CIA was formed. In 1944, an AFL convention, and a motion written by J. Lovestone, the AFL set up something called the Free Trade Union Committee to help anti-communist unions in Western Europe after the war. Now, originally that was funded by worker money, dues and donations, but in 1948, the CIA began putting a lot of money into the Free Trade Union Committee. And of course, they had a lot of control with all this money. Though, there was still some independence on part of the AFL and then the AFL-CIO over what they were doing in Europe. They sometimes would disagree with the CIA. Now, that pretty much stopped in 1958. And then you had AFL formed in 1962, which did not have independence from the CIA. Didn't even pretend, as far as I can tell, they have independence. And formed 2 other institutes which were related, working in Africa and Asia, the African American Labor Center and the Asian American Free Labor Institute. And then we had 2 AFL-CIO international affairs directors who were paid CIA agents. Lovestone, I talked about, from 63 to 74, and then Irving Brown from 82 to 86. And he was appointed by Lane Kirkland, who is another story. We probably don't have time to go into Lane Kirkland. But there's some of the background to this history.
Yeah, I think that was that was really well, that was beautifully explained. I think one thing that's always stuck out to me is looking at the origins of the AFL and the CIO, just the kind of politics it would attract. I mean, like on one end, you've got very specialized forms of labor that and just really focusing only on those groups, and then naturally the further left politics of like socialism and communism, you see an attraction to larger industrialized labor, something that is more for all the workers. This book, when I was reading it, I just always had this sense that the really rabid anti-communist politics of the Red Scare, through the process of purging AFL-CIO, really opened the doors for some unholy unions and influence from the CIO. That's been my take, at least. But yeah, thank you for going over all of that. I think maybe now we can shift to some Mexico specific stuff. So given, oh yeah, I should have announced this earlier. This is the first of our Mexico solidarity with the Mexico and solidarity with the Mexican working class series. So given that, I'd like to get into some specifics about U.S. interventionism in Mexico. Maybe we could touch on some of the larger economic and political factors surrounding the coup, El Golpe, that you mentioned earlier in this presentation. Could you tell us a little about NAFTA, how El Golpe and the surrounding events connect to NAFTA, and the long-term impact that El Golpe and NAFTA had, not just on Mexican workers, but workers back home as well in the U.S.?
Yeah, NAFTA was passed in 1994. It was the North American Free Trade Agreement. It eliminated trade barriers between Mexico and the U.S., also provided security for corporate investment in Mexico. Really a very complicated agreement. I've heard it was like this thick. I've never seen the whole thing. But in the 1980s, as I hit in the PowerPoint, the auto companies were already moving to Mexico to take advantage of cheap labor and weak unions. And following the political crisis in Mexico in 1988, the newly imposed president of Mexico, Salinas, had a meeting in Houston with George H. Bush, who just won an election himself. And they had a meeting and they discussed, I believe, the free trade agreement and economic ties between Mexico and the United States. Now you can see the people after that meeting, within a few weeks, you had John Negroponte, who, has got a long and notorious history with the intelligence world. He became the first director of national intelligence, and Robert Pastorino were both sent to be in the embassy, and a new CIA chief of station was sent. It was a guy named Vincent Shields, who'd also been in Honduras with these two, and he'd been accused of training a counterinsurgency battalion that later became a death squad, though he denied having anything to do with that. Those three immediately were in Mexico, and I believe they were obvious there to defeat the left and help Salinas take the country in the direction he wanted to. Now, those people, there were people and labor groups in Mexico opposed to NAFTA because they thought it gave too much power to foreign corporations. At that point, the AFL-CIO was still supporting the CTM, which was pushing for NAFTA and wanted one. They wanted this cheap labor export economy they thought would bring them lots of jobs. So, I would just like to read a couple paragraphs. One of these fired Ford Workers Democratic Movement people came to the Minnesota AFL-CIO convention in 1991 and spoke on free trade. So I just want to read a couple books about what he said, because in 1991, he knew exactly where this was headed. His name was Raul Escobar Briones. Escobar declared that Mexican authorities and government-influenced unions were eager to collaborate with foreign corporations and support the agreement, the proposed NAFTA, this is 1991, to demonstrate that Mexico will supply cheap and cooperative labor. Escobar urged delegates at the convention to work in solidarity with Mexican and Canadian workers because we're all affected by the free trade agreement. He said Mexican workers have little hope for change without legal reforms in Mexico and without international coordination by unions to defend labor gains in the face of the global marketplace. Well, you know, American workers suffered terribly, and manufacturing from NAFTA. I mean, hundreds of thousands of jobs left the US to go to this cheap labor market and weak unions in Mexico. People my generation, you don't need to have to explain a lot about NAFTA because it is a dirty word. I see Steve smiling. He lived through that too. His plant closed, as did mine. But today, you know, things have changed. There have been some legal reforms, and maybe we can talk about that later.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I thought this book in particular was a great way to open up a series on solidarity with the Mexican working class, given just how much it really drives home how local labor issues and those of imperialism, specifically with the exportation of labor and labor exploitation to other countries, are interlinked. And I mean, it is interesting to see how today how this kind of comes back home in a very warped way by conservatives and those on the far right. When you see the negative impact that this has on local workers, how that then gets blamed on the very group that the working class in those other countries that we have pushed our labor exploitation towards. But yeah, I think this work really does a great job at illustrating that connection between the plight of local and foreign labor and under imperialism, and why it is so necessary to have to approach our work with through international solidarity. So that said, there's a lot happening in local labor efforts right now that connects back to this point, specifically with regard to the after effects of NAFTA, I think. I do think this is a good opportunity to talk about the recent UAW strikes and their connection to exported production throughout the Americas. I think you have a very interesting perspective on these strikes, and I definitely want to get to that. But first, really want to thank Steve for being here. I was hoping maybe he could tell us a little bit about the recent UAW strikes and current developments. Could you just give us an overview, Steve? Would that be okay?
Yeah, that'll be great. Obviously, the strike started about 37 days ago, at 38 as of today, when our contract expired back in mid-September. This has been a different negotiation than we're used to. As Rob knows, the auto workers have always had what they call pattern bargaining, and the UAW usually picks one of the companies, if it be Ford or Stellantis, which used to be Chrysler, or General Motors. They would pick one of those companies to negotiate a contract with, and then when they achieve that and it's passed by the membership, then they try to pattern bargain with those rest of those companies to get something almost identical or as close as they could. This is the first year that we have had direct elections for our executive board, and including our president. We've always had delegates, constitutional convention delegates from locals that would go and vote on these positions. But this year, with all the corruption that's happened in the UAW over the last 5 to 6 years, we had 2 former presidents go to prison. We've had vice presidents go to prison. There's a lot of corruption going on. The membership voted to do direct elections this year. So we have a new leader. His name is Shawn Fain. And he has taken us in a different direction, where he has basically pitted all 3 companies against each other to see which is the best deal that they can come up with. So, and instead of sending out strikes, everybody out, he's been picking specific plants that are money makers for the companies. So the first week he sent out a plant at Ford, and one at GM, and one at Stellantis. The second week he picked what they call parts distribution centers, is what from Stellantis and General Motors. He did not send Fords out because they were making some progress at the time. But my plant is a parts distribution center. So we have been out on strike since September 22nd. And we supply, there's 14 plants in North America for General Motors that supply parts for dealerships. And so that's what we do. And that's what the Mopar part of Stellantis does. And they also are out on strike, all their warehouses. Ford is currently still working. So my local unit 1, I'm a part of an amalgamated union. I'm president of 4 units. I have a General Motors unit, which I am the employee of. And then we also have a Ford unit, which Rob is aware of. He knows some of the people down there. There are unit 3. They are still currently working at this point. And I have 2 janitorial staffs that work in each building that I represent. So we have been out for a month. There has been some, headway. It started out pretty sad. I mean, they were going for 9% wage increases over a 4-year period, which is just not acceptable. Little history with these companies, General Motors and Stellantis were going to go bankrupt in 2008 and 2009. And Ford wasn't going bankrupt, but they were in big financial trouble. And when the big the stock market and everything dropped in 2008 and the gas prices went through the roof, UAW reopened all their contracts to keep these companies from going under, and we gave up a lot of stuff to help the companies, with the idea that when these companies became economically viable again, that we would get those things back. So we gave up pay increases, we gave up cost of living increases, we gave up pensions. Anybody hired after 2008 no longer receives a pension anymore, or medical when they retire. And we also opened up, which the worst thing we did, but I mean, we were sort of behind the 8 ball because the government was pushing that we had to make these concessions in order for them to help bail out these companies, was opening what they call tiers, and they started hiring people in at different rates. So people are getting paid different rates to do the same jobs, which is really contrary to what the union has always been about. It's about equal pay for equal work. It doesn't matter if you're male, doesn't matter if you're female, it doesn't matter what color you are. It's supposed to be equal pay, equal work. So this has obviously caused a huge problem and division, which is what the company's real goal was. It's financially, it helps them out. Yes, it does, but it also is more of dividing the UAW and dividing worker against worker. Shoot ahead this 15 years, the last 10 years, these 3 companies have made record profits of $250 billion, $250 billion. The last 4 years, the CEO's pay has gone up 40%. The GM's Mary Barra, the CEO, makes over $30 million a year. And the Ford CEO and Stellantis CEO are not far behind. They're in the mid to high 20s million. Cost of vehicles has gone up 30%. Inflation has gone up 18.6%, and wages have gone up 6%. So when they try to tell you that the reason the car prices are going up is because of labor, that's a crock of what. It has nothing to do with that. I have people in here that start in my building $2 less an hour today than they did in 2007. They used to start at $19 an hour. They now start at $17 an hour. In my building, it takes 8 years for those people to come to full wage. And full wage for them is $25. That's what they're capped at. They cannot make more than that. So it takes them 8 years to go up $8. I know you guys live, I'm sure the cost of living is even higher than where we're at, but in the Twin Cities area, it is quite high. I have people that are working 2 jobs just to pay rent. Let alone, they're never going to be able to own a house. They're not going to be able to put kids through college. These jobs back in the day built the middle class. The auto industry with the auto workers is one of the reasons the middle class really took off in the 50s and 60s. You used to be able to buy a house. You used to be able to raise a family. You used to be able to send your kids to college. Well, they've taken that all away. They try to cry poverty when they're making these record profits of, in the first half of this year, they made $22 billion profit between the 3 of them in just the first half of the year. So it's been a battle. I can go over exactly, there's basically 9 things that the UAW has asked. Obviously, the top on one of the top of the list is wages. And the UAW wanted significant double-digit pay increases to make up for the last 15 years of not getting raises, to keep up with inflation and to make these people whole that gave up all these things 15 years ago. So they started out at 46% of pay increases over the 4-year period. It sounds like a lot, but when you factor in some of these people are making $20 an hour or $17 an hour, it really doesn't add up to that much over a 4-year period. The number sounds like it does, but it doesn't. They started out at the low 5-6%, and then I got up to 9%. And currently, all 3 for the last proposals, Ford, Chrysler, and Stellantis and GM have both had 23% pay increases over the 4-year period. So that's where they're at today. We wanted 46, they're at 23. I don't know at this point. UAW says there's more to get. So none of these contracts have been accepted yet, and they haven't even put one out for a vote yet. So we're going to see where that goes. So that's where they're at today. The wage tiers, which is obviously a huge thing. UAW wants elimination of all wage tiers, so that there's a path for everybody to come to full pay, so everybody's equal. As of now, Ford and General Motors have agreed to eliminate the wage tiers, and so has Stellantis at this point. So anybody that's full-time at this point, those tiers were going to be eliminated, which is a great thing. It's huge for a lot of my younger membership. And they will be able to, get a path up to full wage, just like the rest of us. So that's something that's been fantastic that we've worked with the companies, and it's good news. And so that's where they're at with those wage tiers. Wage progression is another one. We want a 90-day progression, like it used to be years ago. You get your 90 days in, you were a full-time employee, you were at the top rate. Ford has agreed to go back to the mid-90s formula, which at that time was a 3-year progression. So they've agreed to go back to that from 8 years. The 3 companies were at 8 years and really never to full pay, but now they agreed to do that. General Motors has agreed also to a 3-year progression for current workers, but they still want to keep it at 4 years for anybody they hire in the future. So they're still not there yet. Stellantis is still at the 4-year progression mark. They don't want to budge from that. So that's still under negotiation. Huge thing also for our people is obviously the cost of living. When we gave that up back in 2008 and 2009, we've never gotten it back, even though we were promised we were going to get it back. And as we know, the cost of everything over the last decade has gone up and up and up, and the COLA has not been there to help our people. So the UAW wanted to, go back to the original formula to keep up with inflation. Ford has agreed at this point to restore the cost of living from the 2009 level, which was excellent. That they've agreed to go to there. GM is very close. There's still a few things they're trying to work out. They're not quite at that 2009 level, but they're very close. Stellantis is digging their heels in and say they're not going to give pre-2009 COLA back. So they're at the bottom of the list right now as far as getting what the UAW is demanding. Profit sharing, UAW asked for enhanced profit sharing formula, and also to include temporary employees, which have not been included in the past. You could be a temporary employee that's worked there for 6 years, and you are not included in the profit sharing. So the UAW says that's not right. They're doing the work just as the regular workers are. They should be included in that. So Ford has improved their profit sharing by moving to total company profits, including Ford credit, and temporary employees are now eligible, which is very good news. GM, on the other hand, wants to maintain current profit sharing formula. They do not want to go back to they don't want to go up like Ford did, but they are going to allow temporary employees with at least 1,000 hours of work in will be eligible for profit sharing. Stellantis does not want to budge at all. They do not want to change the profit sharing formula, and they do not want to include temporary employees. So they're sort of at a standstill there. Temporary employees, obviously, we don't want people, these should be full-time jobs. They have these people in here for 5-6 years as temporary employees, and they're working full-time. They're working 50, 60 hours a week as a temporary employee. So they don't get the benefits, they don't get the profit sharing, they don't get a lot of the things that everybody else does. The UAW wants to end the abuse of these temporary employees and converting them to full-time after 90 days and providing full benefits and profit sharing. Ford says they are going to convert any temps with 90 days in at before the strike. Any of those people, that they will be full-time now. And they will be raising the wage from $17 an hour to $21 an hour for any future temporary employees that start. So they're moving them up $4 an hour. I think they could have went higher, but at least it's a start. Conversion of current and future temps within 1 year to full-time is what General Motors has offered. They haven't gone as far as Ford with 90 days. They want at least these people, they have at least 1 year in to move up to full-time. They also increased their wage from 17 to 21 for any temps starting from this day forward. Stellantis is conversion of thousands of current temps to full-time, and they want to bring their wages up to $20 an hour. As far as being temps in the future being moved over to full-time, they're still not in agreement of that, and they're still negotiating on that. I think you guys can see a pattern here that Stellantis seems to be the one that does not want to move forward at this point. Ford and GM have been making concessions and are moving towards getting an agreement, but Stellantis is just digging their heels in and does not want to give in to any of the UAW demands. As far as job security, UAW's demands for job security is the right to strike over plant closures. So as Rob knows, his plant closed, my plant closed. I'm originally from Janesville, Wisconsin, the Janesville Assembly Plant. I hired in there in '86. I had 7,000 people when I hired in at that facility. It is now closed and gone. Nothing left. So I had to leave there in '09. So the families that are decimated and destroyed by these plant closures is what people don't understand. A lot of my friends, I had to leave my family. I had to leave my wife and kids in Janesville because our house overnight went from basically dropped in half value. So I had to leave my wife and kids where they were. And luckily I landed close, 4.5 hours north of where I'm from originally. I'm up by Rob in the Hudson, Wisconsin area. And the families that are destroyed, families that husbands and wives that were separated and divorced, the families torn apart, or a spouse did want to go with their other spouse to follow a new job. They had to quit their job. They had to uproot the kids. They couldn't sell the house because the property in Janesville, obviously a town of 65, 70,000 people, when that plant went out, devastated the economy, and everything in that city lost its value. So it destroys lives. And this is what the company, they act like it's not a big deal when they move things, but it destroys families, it destroys marriages, and it destroys communities. So we want a right to strike. We want that to be a right to do if these companies want to close a plant. Ford has agreed to that. Ford has agreed that they will allow part of the contract that UAW can strike Ford if they close plants, which is a significant progression from where they were. I mean, they were adamantly said that we're not going to ever allow that. They have now agreed to that. As of now, GM and Stellantis are rejecting that. They will not agree to allowing us to strike due to a plant closure. I have two other topics here. Work-life balance. Some of these people, we're working 50, 60 hours a week. They're working 7 days a week. Some people, they don't have time for their families. They don't have time to attend their kids' stuff at school. It's just, we want to be able to have a family life and a life outside of work. And that's what we're asking for. So the UAW increased with more paid time off and holidays, so people can take time off to be with their families and to do things. and to see their kids grow up and to attend events and stuff. Ford is what they've come up with is they have now allowed Juneteenth to be a paid holiday. So they added one paid holiday and 2 weeks of paid parental leave. We've never had parental leave in the UAW with the big three. So that's what their proposal is. Not an increase in vacation time, especially for our younger members who get a week off a year. So that's what they agreed to. That's what General Motors agreed to. And that's what Stellantis agreed to at this point, is they added Juneteenth as a holiday and 2 weeks of paid parental leave. So that's where they're at there. The last thing is retirement. UAW, we gave those pensions up in 2008 to make the company, prevent those companies from going bankrupt. We want those pensions back for all of our members. And UAW is asking for retirement security for all members, not just pensions, but also health care when they retire. A lot of our people are, their bodies get beaten up doing these jobs, carpal tunnel and shoulder surgeries and knee surgeries and back surgeries. And it's important that people have medical coverage for these. Ford's proposal is a 401k for their newer members. They don't want to give pensions to any members after 08, but they said they would increase company contribution from 6.5% to 9.5% plus $1 an hour to match 401ks for people at the company. And for retirees who have not had an increase in their pensions in, I believe it's almost 15 to 18 years, somewhere in that time frame. Obviously, your money doesn't go near as far today as it did 15 years ago. Their Ford's offer was to give every year a lump sum payment to retirees of $250. So $1,000 over the life of the contract of 4 years. GM did not go up as high as Ford. They went up to 8%. And they said they would do a $3 increase to pension benefits for the 401k people. Current retirees, they want to do just a lump sum payment of $1,000 one time. So Ford is doing $250 over 4 years. GM is doing $1,000 at one time. So basically, after taxes, you're probably more like $750. Stellantis went up to 9.5% matching on 401k, so they are a little better than GM at that topic there, but rejected all increases to retiree pay. They don't want to give them any more. They don't want to give them any lump sum payments or anything at this point. So that is, I know it's a little long-winded, but that's where we're at this point. We have made significant increases in a lot of things. One of the things I did not mention is two of the divisions of General Motors that I can speak for. They call them GMCH, which used to be General Motors Delphi. And when Delphi went bankrupt, they spun them off into what they call General Motors Holdings. And there's four places that basically provide parts for General Motors and 20 other companies around the world. Those people actually make less money. They start them at $17 an hour, and they cannot make more than $23 an hour. CCAs, which I come from, are parts distribution centers. CCA stands for customer care and after sales. Our people's topped off at $25 an hour. Now, assembly plants, they're up to about $33.50 an hour. So there's still a tier in between just where you work. The good news is Ford and GM and Stellantis have all agreed to take away those pay differences, and everybody's going to be able to make the same amount of money. If you're in an assembly plant, or if you're in a parts plant, or if you're in a GMCH holdings facility or whatever, everybody will be making the same wage. So that is one good thing, especially for my younger people. So the companies are moving in the right direction. It's very slow. The process is slow. They do not want to share their money with their employees. They're doing, the CEOs are making record profits. They're doing stock buybacks for their criminal friends on Wall Street. And that's where the money goes, and they don't want to share it with their employees, which is unfortunate. when the pandemic was here, we were working every day. We never had days off. We were considered essential. We provide parts for first responder vehicles and things like that. So we worked every day during that pandemic. A lot of people get extremely sick. Luckily, nobody died in my facility, but in other facilities around the country, there's been a lot of people that passed away during that time frame. We were considered essential employees, and now the company wants to call us greedy employees, unrealistic and greedy. And all we're asking for is, you guys are making record profits. We expect that you share that wealth with your employees, because without them, none of this would be possible. So that's what I have for you guys. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them. I hope I didn't go on too long on this, but I just wanted to give you a total idea of where we're at. And I'm hoping something gets done soon. I'm keeping our fingers crossed, but I think it might be a little bit yet. But our people are solid. There's a lot of solidarity. I have guys that have 41 years in working up here, and I have 2 kids that started 2 months ago. So it's an interesting, I put them all together. I mix my teams up and put the old people with the young people. So they get to know each other, and they get to teach each other, what's important to each other in their lives. So there's been a lot of positives coming out of things like this. It really brings a lot of solidarity, and it brings our people together closer. And then seeing the unions from around the areas that have come out to support us has been fantastic. From the Teamsters to the teachers, the SEIU, AFL-CIO. I mean, I can go on the list. The electrical workers, people come out in droves. They bring us food. They bring us gift cards. They're out there just to walk the picket line with us and tell us, that, we got your back and we're proud of you guys. And it really means a lot to me personally. It really means a lot to my people, because it shows that people care about each other. And the only way we're going to stop this inequality that we have gotten to at this point in this country and around the world is to be united together. UAW can't do it by themselves. The Teamsters can't do it by themselves. It takes all of us together with fighting for each other in order to take on these corporations and take on the rich, because they're not going to be happy until there's 2 classes of people in this world. And that's them, the very rich, and then the rest of us down at the bottom. And the only way we're going to stop it is to be united. And you're seeing, this is the year of the strike. It's cool to see the interest in union membership going up. And a lot of these younger people are really want to get involved, and it's really good to see. And we need to keep that momentum going in that direction. So that's what I got. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was fantastic. Yeah, I thought that was a great overview of just the specific demands being made by in these strikes, the very real devastating impact that worker exploitation and closure of plants, that all of this has on local workers, and how important solidarity is in all of this. I thought that was a great overview. So I did want to hear, right before we open this up to the audience, I did want to hear Rob's perspective on some of this, because I know that he has a pretty interesting one, specifically with regard to the connection between strikes and the exportation of labor. And Rob, you actually sent me a fantastic article by Jeff Shirke. I'm not sure if I pronounced
Hermanson.
What was it?
Yeah. Hermanson.
Oh, Hermanson. Oh, I thought it was Shirke. Okay.
I don't know. I might have
sent
said something else. I don't know sure which one I'm saying. Oh, Jeff
from
Shirke.
Indies
Yeah,
Times. Shirke,
Jeff
Shirke.
Shirke.
Yeah, it was great. And it was specifically on Mexico UAW worker solidarity, and not just Mexico, but across the Americas. In that article, it talks a bit about just the insane amount of labor exportation that has happened since NAFTA. And you commented that most of that is accounted for by the transfer of work to Mexico. First it was listing out just all of the plant closures and the poor conditions of the lack of job availability for workers locally, and how that's played out in the plight of local labor. And as you write, as you are quoted in this, most of that is accounted for by the transfer of work to Mexico. The only thing that could have changed that was helping Mexican workers raise their wages, benefits, and working conditions. Meiju Liu. Oh, by the way, another great victory is just the dissolving of the tier system. I thought that's fantastic to hear that in some areas that's been ended. I think Meiju had from Mexico Solidarity Project had an interesting quote in that article. The first tier structure was created between Mexican workers and U.S. workers. Just as UAW wants to unify its members by getting rid of tiers, hopefully they also see that they've got to get rid of this split between Mexican and U.S. workers. Rob, I was hoping you could talk a bit about your perspective on strikes and particularly the role Mexican labor plays in this, as well as some concerns you've had regarding the potential outcome. I don't know if that's shifted at all with the recent developments with the strikes, but yeah, maybe we could just hear you talk a bit about your perspective on a lot of this.
Yeah, well, thanks. I'll try to be brief so some other people can get a chance to talk to us. Union presidents do have a lot to say quite often. I was working on the manuscript for El Golpe in 2019. And at that time, Steve's Local went out on strike. They were out for 40 days. That is a long strike for hourly workers. They basically got nothing after 40, completely shutting down the entire GM system. I mean, they were out there dedicated, and it was really about getting back so much that we've lost. Now, when I was the last union president around 2003, the all-in wage, all the value of all the wages and benefits we get expressed in hourly form was $65 an hour, which was really good at that time. That was, a very comfortable living. Now, here we are 20 years later. Today, it's $66 an hour. So basically, American auto workers have had a 20-year wage freeze. So it's very understandable why people are angry and upset. Now, the problem is the days when Walter Reuther used to go battle these auto companies, 90% of the auto production was under UAW contracts. Today, the Detroit 3 has 41% of domestic sales, and a big chunk of that is from the Mexican assembly plants. So you might be looking like a third of domestic auto sales are under UAW contract. So the weapons you've got to confront these corporations is much, much weaker. So even today, so the UAW contract, the average wage, the all-in wage is 66. The non-union companies in the South, the transplants, the Toyotas, Hondas, Nissans, Kias, Volkswagen, is 56 to 58. So they're $8 to $10 an hour or less in wages and benefits that the UAW workers are getting. And they've basically been frozen too. The new player on the block is Tesla. They're paying $45 in the battle for electrification. And in Mexico, the all-in wage and benefit is $5 an hour. So it's not like this shift to Mexico is gone. I mean, one of the issues in the Stellantis strike is the closing of the Belvedere assembly plant. That's a fairly modern plant. It is shut down. Workers are all dissipated, transferred, taken buyouts, and that work is going to Mexico. It's an issue, but we just don't have the power to really confront them on that. Now, a guy named Jeffrey Hermanson, and that's why I was thinking about his paper when you said that, he wrote a paper that was published in the New Labor Forum that said that 300,000 auto jobs have been lost in the U.S., and it's accounted for a 20% decline in real wages in the U.S., this transfer of auto work to Mexico. I didn't put a number on that in my book, but it's pretty easy to get there. The number of jobs there, easy to get to 300,000. And the 20% decline in real wages, I mean, like people like Steve and my age, once these factories started closing, there was a glut of labor out there scrambling around trying to find any work they could. That drove wages down. The manufacturing plants, every contract that was unionized, they threatened to move the plant to Mexico. The non-union plants, they threatened to move to Mexico. So I think this 20% decline in real wages as a result of the transfer to Mexico is real. And we had an opportunity in the 1990s to help an independent union movement in Mexico. We didn't do it in organized labor. We actually supported the side that crushed that movement. Now, there's a big movement now among Mexican workers with some support from the government to start new independent unions. They won an election at a big GM plant in Silao. And so we really need to help ourselves. We need to help these Mexicans unionize. It's not a quick fix. It's not an easy fix. It's not something you can turn around a month or two and show results, but that will show results in the long term. And what I really think is needed is for the UAW to set up a Mexican regional labor council where we can all meet together. We've got a totally integrated production system. Parts, vehicles flow back and across the border like there was nothing there. Yet we have bifurcated labor movements who barely even talk to each other. And it's a very weak movement that needs our support in Mexico. So again, I think we should spend some of our time and effort on some kind of regional council and in our own interest, help these Mexican independent unions.
That's great. Thank you, Rob. So that's actually perfect timing. I think 2:20 was when I had set for the questions that we just got through. What we can do now, I think, is open up questions out to the audience. So for those on Zoom, what I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to do stack. So if you have a question, please type stack, STAC, into the chat. That way I can know the order of who signaled when, like that they want to ask a question. I know Susan has one in here, so people in the room too, if you want to raise your hand, all three of us, if you want to raise your hand, that works. But maybe we could start with Susan's question, and then if people have any questions on Zoom, just type in stack into the chat, and I'll make sure to go through them so that way we can get to everyone. Susan, did you want to? Here, I'm going to move this more to the center. I just had it here for when I was this portion of the talk. This is why we have a high chair. Okay. All right. Can people?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
I can hear her.
Okay. Want to thank Rob and Steve very much for presentations. I have a question which you could both address if you want. Regarding the negotiations going on now, could you talk a bit about issues regarding electric vehicles and batteries?
Yes, I did leave that out. That is obviously a huge thing. I mean, the future of the auto industry is changing. And if our fear, the UAW's fear is these companies already are trying to spin off these subsidiaries like the Blue Oval at Ford and some of the ones where the UAW wants to be able to organize those plants. They want them included in the master contract. Obviously, these companies are balking at that. They don't want that. Now, Rob's and I have had this discussion yesterday over coffee. We discussed this a little bit. There was brought out that General Motors agreed to allow this to happen, but we have not seen anything in writing yet that, I mean, this is supposedly General Motors has agreed to allow this, but until we see this on paper, I'm not buying it. So I know this is a really contentious. The UAW wants these battery plants to be rolled into the master contract, and they want it to be organized, and the companies right now do not want that. So it's part of the reason we're at a standstill. It's a huge part. That was my omission to leave that out. I apologize for that. But I'll let Rob go on a little bit on that too, because him and I had this discussion yesterday.
Yeah.
So.
I know Ford quite a bit better than I do the other companies, but I think that is the main issue in this negotiation, because they're trying to run away from the union with the transition to EV, which, there's a lot of grumbling, especially some of the Trump people that we need to keep internal combustion engines. But I think the leadership is firm that, yeah, this is the way the world's going, and we have to try to get in sync with it. But this is a permissive subject under U.S. labor law. That means the employers do not have to discuss it because it involves people who aren't even in the bargaining unit. And permissive means they can talk about it, but they don't have to. So a really difficult place to make progress. I know Ford has already announced that they're making something called Blue Oval City in Tennessee and Kentucky. It will be the new Rouge complex, the diamond jewel in the Ford system, 6,000 jobs in Tennessee and 5,000 in Kentucky making batteries. And, they've said, well, the UAW will have to win an election here. They're not going to be, and we're not going to put them in under the contract. That's what they told reporters in the press conference I watched. And this is a really difficult thing for the union to win. And I'm really glad that they made an effort to do it. I don't expect that they're going to be successful with this. I'm concerned myself about the strike over plant closing language, because they only close plants in negotiations. They idle them during the contract. And that means they stop the production. People go on layoff. After 6 months, you lose your health insurance, and you run out of unemployment, and people have to take transfers and buyouts. So, if there's language that lets you strike an idled plant, that would be something that, might be an effective tool. So again, I think the only solution, and this is unfortunate, is that the UAW has to be able to organize these plants. And we really need to take a hard look at why the UAW has never been able to organize a single transplant in the South. There was one Mitsubishi plant in Southern Illinois that was organized, but that's closed now. But a total failure to be able to do that. And it's not like we don't make a lot more money than they do. So it's something that UAW really needs to figure out. And I hope they can get a foot in the door on helping get those under the contract, because they are really trying to run away from the union there.
That was great. Thank you. So stack is open for anyone who might have a question, both.
I have a question.
Yeah, Mike, go for it.
This goes back to AIFLD. When did it end, and what is replacing it?
Well, that's a good question.
Because the U.S. is still fucking around in other countries.
Very good question. It was founded in 1962. It was disbanded in 1996, but the successor to that was something called the Solidarity Center. Now, when I was researching this, I did not want to get into the Solidarity Center because they're still active. They've got huge budgets, good records. They apparently do some good stuff during the time I was researching this, but I came across some original research, so I included that in the book about the Solidarity Center. So this William Doherty, who I talked about, had been the executive director of AFL and had been a CIA agent. I had an interview with him where he talked about what we need to do, and this is at his retirement in 1996. Well, what we need to do now that the Cold War is over, we need to change. We need to be an organization that works around trade and human rights. Words to those effect. Well, that's exactly what the Solidarity Center is. And the first director of the Solidarity Center was a guy named Harry Cambris, who, again, I did some research, and it's out there if people want to look. He was a career CIA agent, and he was the head of the Solidarity Center from 96 to 2005. They finally pushed him out. So, my view, and I didn't go into my current view of the Solidarity, it's government funded. It's 94% government funded, and they're pretty much doing what the State Department wants done. Now, they are doing great work in Mexico right now. They are supporting this independent union movement. And my view of this is the Biden administration has seen what a politically destabilizing factor that cheap labor on the border has been, and all the immigration as a result. And they are genuinely trying to help these independent unions. That's my view of them now. So, make a lot of effort criticizing the Solidarity Center now because I know that a lot of these independent union groups are dependent on their aid. So that's where I'm at on that issue. That's, of course, a very good question.
What I think, though, that they did some pretty negative stuff in Venezuela to try to bring down Chavez.
Yeah, I don't think there's any.
I'm not recalling where I read it though, but the
No, you're right. Kim Sipes wrote about that, and he was exactly right. Actually, when I was working on this in 2018, I got some calls that they had helped them destabilize the Morales government. There was a coup against Evo Morales in Bolivia. And I believe that was true. I believe the unions the Solidarity Center was working with helped destabilize Morales. But again, that was under the Trump administration. And, the Solidarity Center is doing what the State Department wants done, from my view. I know there's a lot of people who have kids and people who swear they're an independent labor rights group, but another example of, I don't think they're on the side of the angels there in Bolivia in 2018.
Nice.
That's great. I am also wondering, I don't know, maybe someone else can speak more to this. It's very new for me, but I know that the role of unions in Mexico changed a lot also under AMLO. I think as you detail in the book, this was definitely true under the PRI, but afterwards, I think they were still unions were very tended to have their hands tied. Like there was a lot of gesturing towards working on behalf of the interest of the working class there, but then they would often actually work in favor of the right-wing administrations that were in power. I am curious to what degree the role of the AMLO administration and Morena played as well. Not sure when the timing lined up. I should have actually had information for that. Sorry if I was going to bring it up. I think you also mentioned that the AI, I guess, if you're, I definitely respect wanting to be a lot less critical. You also mentioned the American Institute of, was it the AID? I can't remember. One of them also there were financial ties too. It wasn't just CIA connections in the book. There that were part of the new, because the shift happened with the New Voice, right? Was that the name of it? When that led into the Solidarity Center. I might be mixing up.
What was the question again? The role of U.S. aid?
Yeah, was it U.S. There was an organization that was involved in a lot of coup stuff.
Oh, the National Endowment for Democracy, probably the NED.
Yes, thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I got my acronyms mixed up.
Right.
That financial tie continued afterwards. Is that correct? After it shifted away from more overt Cold War tactics. Is that right?
Yeah. The NED funded AIFLD. Now, actually, I even put a copy of a check that I found from the NED to AIFLD in Mexico. But so when AIFLD was disbanded, they fund Solidarity Center now. I can't get the exact percentage, but I bet it's very high. There's a couple other government agencies that fund Solidarity Center too, but the biggest funder is the National Endowment for Democracy.
Yeah. I mean, it's good that there is a lot more support happening in Mexico, and that they're doing good work there. But it does seem that even with shifts and sort of surface politics, you still have a lot of these institutional forces that keep popping up. Like you said, people show up with CIA connections, organizations that work on behalf of U.S. imperialism. Those tend to find their way connected to these organizations still. It would be interesting to look into what caused the shift in their relation to Mexico, though. That's a really interesting perspective you had with the Biden administration, how it shifted with the turn there. Stack is open for people if they have any other questions. Carl, yes. Please go ahead.
I just want to preface this question with a little bit of information. I think a major battle that's going on, not because of the size of the plant, but that it's a US-based manufacturer that is thumbing its nose at the Mexican and US labor authorities over the provisions that are in the US-Mexico-Canada agreement to help protect workers' rights, particularly their right to organize. Talking about VU Manufacturing in Piedra Negras, Coahuila, which is it's a third-tier auto parts factory, and I believe it supplies some of the second-tier auto parts places that are UAW represented, like Lear and Adient. But they have basically, they were workers there had used the rapid response mechanism in the US-Mexico-Canada agreement to force the company to negotiate, to recognize its elected union, La Liga, and to negotiate in good faith. And they were on a remediation plan that they have now closed down the factory there, laid off all the workers, and then put them on blacklists so they can't get elected at other factories. What steps can the UAW do to really put pressure on the U.S. Department of Labor and the U.S. Trade Representative to address that situation, and also go after those second-tier factories that are probably the behind the scenes real investors in VU manufacturing?
Yeah, I see Martin's got his thumb up because the Mexico Solidarity Project and the UAWD, International Mexico Solidarity Committee, has done some work on this and was able to get some people out to demonstrate at some offices in Detroit. Now, I think this is exactly the kind of thing the UAW as an institution needs to be doing, is working with the La Liga and other unions like that. It's still a battle. I mean, Sean Fain has expressed some real support for international solidarity and talking points. I mean, one of the assistant region directors of 9A, Dale Conant, worked on the border and had staff people working with these unions. So there is support on the board. Now, there's also, my region director spoke at the rally at Chicago a couple of weeks ago over the striking Ford plant and talked about VIN numbers. And if it starts with 3, which is a US manufactured vehicle, it's for me. If it starts with a letter, meaning if it was made in Mexico, I can do better. So, that has been a failed strategy the UAW has followed for 40 years. I remember in the 80s, people bought Japanese vehicles and smashed them up with sledgehammers. It does us no good. It actually can do harm. And, we need to move towards solidarity with these Mexican workers. And I really think for it to happen in the UAW, it needs to be organizational and structural. So we start to move past this rhetoric, which there's some good rhetoric now and good words being said about international solidarity, which is something new. But again, change in the UAW is a slow, difficult process. And I'm sure Steve can vouch for that. But, we're better off than we were. And let's just hope we keep moving forward on that. And you sound like you know a lot from VU. Are you in the Mexico Solidarity Project? Is this Carl?
Yes.
Yeah. I was on a message where one of the U.S. members of the trade team really took a beating from Martin Del Campo and Jeffrey Hermanson about what had happened at VU. So you guys are really leading the way on this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to stack.
I want to know what Martin.
Yeah. So Susan, you have a question?
Martin, would you just share with us what you're doing?
Sure, absolutely. Well, it's really the most remarkable development was the VU fired workers themselves, who, after being scattered and don't need to belabor it, Carl has adequately expressed that, who regrouped, right, and really have spread solidarity fever amongst those of us working in Mexico Solidarity Project. I am one who has argued before, and I'm arguing again today, that of course the UAW has a direct interest, but unless and until we get the broader labor movement acting in the manner in which it is capable of acting, right, on these issues, we will not raise the full potential of the solidarity efforts that we need to make. One of the, as a practical matter, when these kinds of issues come up, what the key question that is asked, if not openly is, what's that got to do with us? And I think those of us in the left progressive community had better do a little better work on what's that got to do with us, because it tends to be, well, we pay the arguments that I've heard, we pay tax money, right, which doesn't really connect. And I'll close with this thought. I think that if we just connect the firings of workers for exercising the right in Mexico to the very same thing that's happening here, right? Let's just plain workers who are involved in organizing drives are getting fired right here, right? So if we take up the issue of the discharges in Mexico and link it to discharges in the United States, and then connect it to the plant closures that Steve and Rob have raised, I think it's up to us. And that's the challenge that I'm making from us to us, and the challenge that I think all of us working together can figure out. Thank you for the question, and my family in Mexico would disown me if I did not stand up the way I was raised to stand up in Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin. Yeah, so we got a little bit more time to keep open if anyone else has any other questions. I'll leave it open for a bit and see if anyone wants to ask anything. After that, we can start to wrap up with just some closing announcements.
Just a grateful thanks to the organizers of this event, and to Steve and to Rob. Seeing this clarity and determination is the first step, and thank you and all of those in participating in this session.
Thank you, Martin. You've been at a couple of these now.
Thanks for inviting
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
No, I really appreciate all of you for participating. Thank you, as always, Rob. Always love hearing you talk on this, and thank you, Steve, for joining in. I think it helps to draw the connection to current labor issues at home, and really appreciate Martin, you giving us updates as well. I think I hope to see a lot more Mexico solidarity in our local labor work. So we'll go ahead and then wrap up with just some final announcements, I guess. Well, first off, Rob, do you have anything to announce on your end? Anything going on with you that you'd like people to be directed towards?
No, I've got no announcements whatsoever.
Okay, well, I got an announcement. You should read his book. It's really good. I'm going to go ahead and post a link in a minute. It's a fantastic read. It really it opened my eyes a lot. on the interconnection between local labor and the plight of local labor and the plight of our comrades overseas under imperialism, and did not know anything about AFL or about these organizations that try to weaponize labor in other countries to work on behalf of U.S. imperialism. But I will put a link to that in the chat for the lovely people who showed up here. You'll notice on the pamphlet that Mexico Solidarity and Liberation Road were kind enough to share with us. There's a QR code in the back if you want to sign on for their bulletin, Mexico Solidarity's bulletin. I will also put a link to that in here as well. This, as I mentioned, is the first event that we're doing on a series of solidarity with Mexico and the Mexican working class. Our next event got pushed back a little bit, but it should be, I believe, sometime during the first week of February. We're going to have Jose Luis Ceja, is a prominent Mexican journalist who writes a lot on politics in Mexico and Venezuela. He's a member of Mexico Solidarity Project. He is doing a tour that's just wrapping up right now on the East Coast. He'll be joining the West Coast starting next year. He's going to come talk about U.S. imperialism, the upcoming Mexican and United States presidential elections, like how the interests overlap there, and speak a bit on the massive amount of propaganda that's being pitted against Mexico for us here in the U.S. And that will also lead into our third event, which is going to be a reading group on drug cartels do not exist, a book on propaganda of the war on drugs in Mexico and how that ties to this interest. But I will give information for that in a follow-up email for everyone. Let me just quickly, if you do not mind, post the links that I was referring to. Here is Rob's book. You should absolutely read it, go buy it, go read it. It's amazing. And here is one on the Mexico Solidarity Project's bulletin. Thank you everyone for joining. Yeah, much appreciated.
Thanks for having us. We'll see you
For having
soon.
us. Thanks,
Thank you
guys.
so much. Take care. Solidarity.